In this video, you will learn everything your startup needs to know about Google Analytics 4, even if you never used it before, or if you find it overwhelming and complex. I have helped over 100 startups figure out their analytics stacks. And Google Analytics 4 is one of the most common tools that comes up in our discussions, simply because it's free and it might be a great place to start if you don't have any other tools. Let's get started by understanding the foundation of data in Google Analytics 4. If you don't have an account, the process looks like this. You're going to have to create an account first, and your account is going to hold what are called properties. For most of you out there, you only need one account and one property to start. The account may have an account name. You can see for mine, I have an account name I just called rubenjagarta.com, the website, and then the property rubenjagarta.com. There is something called streams we're going to see in a second, which is what actually collects the data, but you don't need multiple properties for each of your apps. A single property can host multiple apps, and in fact, it's really the ideal setup, as then you can do some cross-platform analysis. Let's look at the data streams. So we go here to data streams. You can see that in this case, I only have one data stream, web. And the data stream is just a source of data. It's where the data is coming from. So we can see that in Google Analytics 4, we can technically add 3 types of data streams: web, iOS, and Android. And we can actually send backend events, which I'll show you in a second. But when you add a new data stream, let's say you wanted to add a new web stream, you can see here, because I already have one, it's telling me that I probably don't need one, which makes sense. You're likely only going to have one web stream, one iOS stream, one Android stream. But let's look at it just in case. You're going to give your URL, a name, and that's basically it. And Google Analytics will capture a bunch of events for you out of the box. You're going to get page views, the scrolls, outbound clicks, which means any click that's not your own domain. Site search, if you actually have that configured properly. Form interactions, video engagement, tends to work really well with like YouTube videos, and I want to say something like Vimeo videos, less if you don't have one of the standard video players, and then file downloads. Once you have it in a stream, you're going to get what's called the measurement ID in each stream, which kind of looks like this. This is typically what you then put wherever you want to implement this. If you look at the view tag instructions down here, it's going to give you a few options. So the most basic option is just to install this manually. You're going to get this little piece of JavaScript code. You add this to your website and your web app, and it just starts working. If you have something special, you may have a CMS, or perhaps if you're an e-commerce startup, you may have Shopify. Typically, they have integrations to Google Analytics 4, and the only thing they'll be asking you is for that measurement ID we saw earlier, this one. You just copy and paste that, and then your CMS will then simply insert that same JavaScript snippet, but with the same measurement ID. You can also do Google Tag Manager here. I won't cover it in this video. I think it's a little out of scope, but let me know in the comments if you are interested in Google Tag Manager for startups, and we can look at how that might work. Now, iOS and Android are special. If we actually look at the iOS, we can see that it's asking us for Firebase. Firebase is the equivalent of Google Analytics 4, but on mobile. That is iOS and Android. Many apps today use Firebase, even if they actually don't use it for analytics. And Firebase gives you a bunch of stuff beyond the analytics portion. I think it gives you like crash monitoring, you can do notifications. There's a good chance your app may already have Firebase. In this case, what we need to do is we need to enable the analytics portion of Firebase. And if you look at the process here, you add Firebase to your, let's say, Android app, you add the SDKs, and then there are special libraries that you can pull in. And analytics is the library that we care about that will then do the equivalent on web, but on Android. That is, we're going to get a bunch of events out of the box for your Android app. And if you look at this is the iOS process, and we look at the available libraries, just like before, again, there is an analytics library that you can then install as part of your Firebase. You can see there's actually quite a few things that Firebase offers you. And then once you have Firebase installed, the analytics portion, Firebase itself will actually give you dashboards and reports with your analytics data. But it's nice to consolidate it all in one place. And that's what this allows us to do. In essence here, what we're doing here is we're going to take, let's say, the iOS bundle ID, the app name, and the other stuff is really just the addition of the Firebase SDK, which means that if you already have Firebase, this process is pretty straightforward. And then the same process occurs for Android. Package name, you can see here that's asking us to eventually add the Firebase SDK. And then we just run the app to verify. That's how you bring web, iOS, and Android data into Google Analytics 4. Let me now show you how you can do server-side events. You may have events, for example, purchases, or let's say you're a subscription startup and you want to track the ongoing payments that members might do as they are subscribed to your service. Those can only happen through some kind of server-side or backend integration. Google Analytics does support it. It is a little funky. Let me actually move here to this whiteboard. And this is roughly the flow that we've been describing. We're going to have a web stream here at the top. This captures web data for your marketing website and your web app. A single web stream can do it both. Then we're going to have the Android and iOS, both for Firebase. And then it just simply gets added as a stream to Google Analytics 4. Technically, you have two products here, Google Analytics and Firebase, but again, it's all consolidated. And then if we want to do backend, we have to use something that's called the measurement protocol that I label here. This is just an API that you can use to send events into Google Analytics 4. You can see that there's no stream for measurement protocol up here on our screen because you're actually going to use the same stream ID, the measurement ID from your web stream to send data. And then you send it to the measurement protocol. I'll show you that in a second. Everything kind of flows into Google Analytics 4 here. And this is where you can then do your reporting and dashboards. We actually look at this helpful diagram that Google provided for us. We have, here is the web data, and it collects a bunch of data for us, and then it sends it to the endpoint for Google Analytics 4. Then we have the Firebase data here, which again does the same thing to the endpoint. And then the server side is what then we can use the measurement protocol and then send it to the same endpoint with the same measurement ID as the web client. So important here, we're going to talk about user IDs in a second, but typically you're going to have something that's called the client ID right here. And it's helpful to collect that in your web app and then pass it on with your server-side events, because that's what then Google is able to use to connect data to your web users. We have a user ID that we're going to look at, but the client ID is usually more important. If you can send both, that would be even better. Okay, let's look at the measurement protocol really quick. It's really not as complex. You can see here that when we're going to send events, we're going to send it to a specific post request on our APIs. And then the payload kind of looks like this. We have an event, then we have the event name, we pass any parameters. Now, it's important to remember that the measurement protocol is only for augmenting your web and iOS and Android data. You cannot do 100% server-side implementation with Google Analytics 4. It's technically possible. It's not impossible, but it's really funky and it's not going to work as well, and I would not recommend it. You really want to keep your JavaScript web tracking, your iOS and Android Firebase tracking, and then simply add any other server-side events through the measurement protocol. Finally, I want to show you the automatically collect events because there's actually quite a bit. If you see here, these are all the events that either the web stream or the iOS Android streams will collect for you. You can see some are app, like this one's. And when the user removes the app, I think this is Android only. Yeah, Android only, which is another distinction to note. Some stuff may work quite well on Android versus iOS, just limitations from Apple. But you can see there's a lot of data you're going to get on the web. Like we saw, it was a file download. I think the mobile data tends to be much more comprehensive than the web data, but you will get a lot of data out of the box just by simply adding those snippets, whether on web or on mobile. Let's go back to look at a couple other settings that you may find helpful. Let's look at data retention here. By default, Google Analytics can retain up to 14 months of data for both event data and user data. This is a little confusing because Google Analytics has reports that show you aggregated data, and most of the reports you have likely seen in Google Analytics are actually aggregated data. Those reports can actually sustain multiple years of data, but the custom reports, those ones can only go back 14 months. This is why it's also helpful to take the data out from Google Analytics into something like a data warehouse, because then you'll be able to maintain multiple years of data. Now, once you implement data, whether on web or on iOS, you will be able to see it. If you go to the reports here, there is a real-time overview. And if you open the website, for example, or your web app, then the real-time overview will show your data within a few minutes, and it'll kind of show you what you're looking at and what events are passing through, like page view or session start. And if you have the mobile data, you'll see the same thing. This is one of the easiest ways just to double check if the snippet or Firebase was implemented correctly. The out-of-the-box tracking by Google Analytics is fantastic. Your startup will get a lot of data from that just by simply adding a few snippets to your web and mobile apps. But if you want to go one more step further, there are several things I would recommend you explore. Let's look at first user IDs. We know that Google Analytics is going to give us something that's called a client ID. On mobile, I believe it's called something different, but it's the same concept. This is an anonymous ID that the SDKs issue and they maintain If you come back to the same browser and you don't clear your cookies, for example, you will have the same client ID. And this is what then allows Google Analytics to then connect events across multiple sessions, multiple days, perhaps multiple weeks, depending on when the cookies will expire. Once a user creates an account or they log in, typically this is in your web app or mobile app, then we have available a user ID from your own product database or your backend. This will be a persistent user ID. You're likely familiar with it, you've seen it. And it's helpful to pass this user ID to Google Analytics. Here's the web documentation. And you can see that in the G tag, this is just JavaScript. We can then pass on the user ID that we control and then we know about. It's important here to not pass any kind of PII. Email will not be a valid user ID, and neither will phone number, even though they are persistent and somewhat unique. You really want something that is not PII related. If you don't have anything besides email, as I faced in a few projects, I would recommend that you hash it. Maybe you put it into some kind of base 64 hash, and then that way it would be persistent, but not PII. Google Analytics is kind of funny with PII. It's very clear in the terms of service that you should not pass it, but I do not know of any account that's ever been banned or deleted because of PII. But it's better to be safe than sorry. Then on mobile, you have the same idea. You can then pass it to your Android and mobile app. And what this is going to do as well, it's going to then add a second ID besides the client ID that then connects all your data. Inside Google Analytics, when you want to connect events, you'll have two possibilities, whether the client ID or the user ID. The second thing you can explore is custom events. Almost every project I worked on has some kind of custom events, custom event parameters. This may be things around very specific to your product. Maybe you have a meditation app and you want to track when users start meditating and when they finish meditating. You can pass those events to Google Analytics. The one thing I'll mention though is Google does have recommended event names if you are going to pass any custom events. So for example, if you're going to pass an event for purchase, you should probably just use this sort of purchase lowercase. Or if you're going to pass checkout events like add payment info, add shipping info, add to cart, kind of use these events whenever possible. Google Analytics is not collecting these events for you out of the box. It's just simply telling you if you have an event around lead generation, you should probably use generate lead. It just kind of gives you a bit of this more logical structure. But again, you can name it whatever you want, and you can include as many event properties as you like in that event. One thing I want to note about event properties is that you do have to enable them. So if we go down here to our settings, we have custom definitions. And this allows us to add custom dimensions and metrics. We're going to get to that in the next section. But basically, whenever you have any kind of custom event property that you want to be available in the interface, you can then come here and add it. Let's say you added the start meditation event, and you have a custom event property under that event that's called meditation name. You give it that name. And then in here, Google Analytics is showing you all the event parameters that you're collecting. You're going to have probably this meditation underscore name. Once you start tracking it, you choose it, and then you save it. And now this custom dimension is available in your data. Before you do that, the event properties will not appear in the interface. They will always be available in the raw data, but not in the interface itself. If you want to use Google Analytics for attribution, a very popular use case, then check out the UTM parameters. You can find this kind of URL builder. There's actually one from Google themselves. And you can put the URL, and then you can add different UTMs for source, campaign, medium, and then it gives you this URL with the URL parameters. And then this is what then allows Google Analytics to know where users are coming from on web, mostly. Mobile attribution is a whole different beast. You need a mobile attribution provider like AppsFlyer or Adjust. I have a couple of videos on my channel for that. If you're interested in that, it's a lot on the mobile side. But on the website, it's actually pretty straightforward. You can link your Google Analytics account to other tools. If you go back to admin here, you can see here there's a bunch of links. In particular, you have Google Ads, for example, where you can then link your Google AdWords account. And it's a two-way integration. That is, Google Analytics can send data to Google Ads. You can use conversions from Google Analytics in your Google Ads campaigns. And it will then ingest campaign data from Google Ads, and you'll be able to view it inside Google Analytics. So we are going to look at BigQuery in a little bit more detail later on. And there's a few other ones that may or may not be relevant. For example, we have Google Play, which you may find handy, but you don't have the Apple Play Store, right? It's a bit of a limited integration depending on what you care about. The right advanced data would really level up your Google Analytics data even more than what you get with just the out of the box. Let's now look at the reports themselves. let's make sense of what we're seeing here and ensure that it's not completely overwhelming. Let's actually go here into the reports left-hand side. The first thing we want to do actually is kind of change this menu order that we have here. So go into the library, and we get different options for what we call collections. It's kind of like just a way to organize the reports. I really like the lifecycle connection. I think it's sort of the best fit for startup. And you can actually take any collection here, and then you can unpublish it or publish it. You can see right now here is publish. And there is one more collection, the user one, which is also handy, which contains user attributes and tech. The one that I find confusing is really the business objectives. Depending on what you chose when you created your account or property, you're going to see different objectives here. And then again, you can kind of publish it or unpublish it. It doesn't really matter if you unpublish it from the perspective like the reports are down here. So it creates a bunch of reports for you. You can see there's 34 reports. And then it just organizes them under the collections. But again, lifecycle, I think, is the way to go. So we look at lifecycle and we open, let's say, the acquisition. You're always going to have this overview page under each of the 3 life cycles. And the overview will give you just a bunch of the charts out of the box. You can see here, this is just some data here on my website. You can change it if you click Customize Report. And you go here, it kind of shows you what the cards that you are, close that by accident, that you are showing. And you can then add cards to the report. And you may have other options that you may care about. You can see actually that there's a bunch of things that already exist. And then you can just save the report and changes to the current report or as a new report. And it will then save in this existing collection that we have. Let's go back to that. Then the second report is typically where you're going to do the bulk of your work. In this case, either the user acquisition or the traffic acquisition. Let's look at user acquisition. I think it's more logical, right? This is looking at user data in Google Analytics. In here, the main thing I want you to remember is that you have dimensions and you have metrics. Dimensions are basically any kind of strings, words, phrases. For example, we have the channel groups like direct, organic video, organic search, and those are the dimensions. And then metrics are the numbers, users, new users, returning users. And in Google Analytics, you're always doing some kind of combination of dimension with metrics. You're going to have this primary dimension. You can actually make some changes here. For example, you can add a second dimension if you click the plus icon here. So, for example, we may want to do this by country. You can see this is, you can do a quick search, and they're all kind of organized into some kind of rough logical order that you may care about. So I find search is honestly the fastest way. And now we'll take the same data and just break it out by a second dimension, which is country in this case, but keep the metrics the same. And again, just like before, we can actually customize this report. So you can see here that we have a line chart, and we're actually hiding the bar chart, though we could if we added to. And then down here is showing you the dimensions that we care about. So we start with this default, and it shows us the initial metrics that we see. And again, we can either add or remove as we desire. Over time, you may find there's certain metrics that you care about and others you don't. For example, you may really not care about returning users or the average engagement time per active user, which is this very specific Google Analytics for metric. You sort of have to Google what the calculation is for some of these metrics. If you don't care about them, you can remove them over time and just keep just total users and new users. And then down here, you tend to have events, which can be actually kind of handy because then you can then look at specific events. For example, you may have a purchase event and you want to say, okay, how many of our different channel sources, how many drove to purchases? And then we can kind of just filter down for that specific one, or maybe first visit. Let's say that might have more data. And we can start to see conversion rates for those specific channels. The other reports are all very similar. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to just show you the ones that I think are the most useful. User acquisition, I think, is the most useful here. Under engagement, I'm going to skip the overview. It's kind of the same idea as before. In here, I think there's 3 reports that are useful. First are the events themselves. This shows you all the events that you're tracking in your project, and then just basic numbers. How many events were fired, how many users fired those events. If there are some events like page view is a great example, where a user may fire multiple page views. Those 2 numbers will be different, the total event count and the total users. And just like before, you may want to remove some columns if we don't find them helpful. And if we can add a secondary dimension as we see fit, you can also kind of click into it, and it'll then give you a little bit more data about this specific event. Show you it's kind of very similar metrics as before, but now in different kind of charts, and it will add other things. You can see kind of add a country. This account doesn't have gender data, but you might have it yourself. Then we have pages and screens, which just simply shows you all your pages on web and your screens on mobile. And it will show you the page path, and then things like page views, active users. Again, some of these metrics may not make a lot of sense. And then lastly, we have landing pages, which I think only makes sense for web. So you can see where users are actually landing on your website. And then again, we could see, for example, conversion rates. This could be a handy way to say if you have a bunch of landing pages that we're using for our traffic acquisition, for how are those landing pages converting towards purchases or some other event that we care about. The monetization only makes sense if you're passing e-commerce data. So you're going to pass purchases with transaction data, which again, you may do, you may not. If you do, you will have journeys. For example, you'll be able to see the e-commerce journey from start to finish and then where users are dropping off. I wouldn't recommend this if you're not using e-commerce. That is, if you just have a regular funnel for your app, it doesn't quite make sense to fit the data into here because Google Analytics is expecting e-commerce events, things like start checkout, add payment info, add shipping info, purchase. If you don't have those events, I would not recommend that. We can look at that in a different way through custom reports. Then the final reports are things like user attributes. This actually may be useful just to understand in country data, demographic data if you do have it. I think tech data can be quite helpful if you go to tech details actually, where you can then have things like browser, you're going to have like device category, what's the breakdown between desktop, mobile, and tablet, and anything sort of tech related. Those are the main reports that are helpful, and they all kind of function the same way. Dimensions, metrics, there's only probably a handful of dimensions and only a handful of metrics that you will care about for your startup. You don't need to learn everything. There must be hundreds of dimensions and hundreds of metrics available here, but we want to narrow down to only the handful that really make the most sense for where our startup is today. Now, once you get a handle on the basic reports, it is helpful to look at some of the custom reports. So you can go here and call it Explore. And in here, we can build custom reports. We can actually see that there's some templates. If you look at the template gallery, we can build a funnel, which again makes more sense if you're not e-commerce, but you still want to look at funnel-related data. You may have path exploration. There is cohort analysis, user lifetime, and a few other things. The way you build this report, and actually I built this one already, you're going to see a screen like this. And the first thing you want to do is choose your date range. This can be a rolling date range, last 28 days, last 30 days, last 90 days. Then we need to choose what dimensions and metrics we want available in the report. So we go here in the dimensions, you'll see that we have pre-selected a few things, such as event name, country. And so this is where I say when there's hundreds of dimensions. You can select the ones you care about. Again, it's going to be maybe 5, 8 or something. And they're going to be available here. You see here that we have 5 dimensions in this report. And then do the same thing for metrics. And you can see that Google Analytics will actually then tell you, based on the dimensions you chose, which metrics you can actually select. So it will narrow down the list for you. You do have segments, which we haven't covered here, but segments are basically saved filters. So you can see here that our mobile traffic, tablet traffic, and web traffic are all filters of the device category dimension. You just simply save that as a handy way. You don't need them. They may just make some things easier. And then, since we're looking at a funnel, we first have to then define the steps. So go here under steps, and here we can then go step 1, step 2, step 3, and then we have some logic. In this case, I'm actually just using page views and saying, when they land on the home page, then they go to the second page called data, and then we actually don't have a third step. We can actually remove this, and then we have this very simple 2-step funnel, and it shows us how many users did step 1, and then how many users did step 2. Then we can do breakdowns by the dimensions we pre-selected. So here, then we're doing a breakdown by device category. So we're breaking down step 1 and step 2 by the device category, and we can see the data here in the table. And then down here, we could do a filter, again, based on the dimensions we selected, or perhaps the metrics. We can do a breakdown by segments down here, or we can do comparisons by segments. For example, maybe, let's try this. This doesn't have tablet traffic, so I actually try mobile, and let's try web, and let's actually remove the breakdown. It's sort of the same idea as a breakdown, but we're doing it by a segment. You may have segments that are very complex that took you some time to build, and kind of repeating that here may take too much time. This is a funnel. Again, it's pretty good for what you get. If I compare this to something like an amplitude mix panel, it's not as powerful, if I'm being honest. And what may take me 2 minutes in amplitude mix panel may take me 10 minutes to do here in Google Analytics. But if this is where you're starting and this is where you have a lot of your data and you're not quite ready to upgrade to something else, this can be good enough. Then you can save those reports. They are saved. For example, you can export the data and we can go back here to explore and they'll be saved there. Now, these are the explorations I mentioned earlier that will only contain about 14 months worth of data. The final thing I'll mention is the data warehouse. Since BigQuery is a Google product, it does make the integration to it very easy, right? If we go down here, We get to choose from a project I manage, then the settings, and then you're ready to go. It honestly takes maybe 90 seconds once you have the project in BigQuery. And created a project in BigQuery maybe takes a few minutes. BigQuery is super easy to do, and I highly recommend that if you happen to live in a Google world. If you don't, if you're, let's say, an AWS user, then you need to find another connector. These are typically things like Fivetran, Airbyte. There's lots of options out there, but I highly, highly recommend that you do this, even if you don't think you're going to be using the data right away for analysis purposes, because you can then collect multiple months and years of data, and it's going to help you avoid some of those retention issues that we saw earlier. A few principles can make your reporting easier. We know there's a couple of advanced options like the custom explorations, and the most flexible option of all is a data warehouse of your choice. I hope you found this helpful for your startup. Again, I know as a founder, lots of things on your plate. I want to make Google Analytics easier for you. If you have any other comments about Google Analytics 4 or any other tools, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear that. Now, those I'm here though, I highly recommend you watch this next video that YouTube thinks you might like to continue to make sense of your startup analytics. My name is Ruben, and I'll see you in the next video.